Hey everyone, Wondrous Lantern here, back with another video. This time, as you can probably tell, I'm going to be discussing my thoughts and take on the Expedition 22 that has just happened in No Man's Sky. But essentially just remember that I am just speaking from my own opinion. You can have another opinion and like the expedition or disagree with me on some points, but just remember I'm just some guy who likes to enjoy a casual space exploration game, so make of that what you will. Before I get the video officially started, I need to preface it by saying I am in no way a hater of this game. I actually really enjoy the game a lot, especially when I got into it on my Xbox One, probably 5 or 6 years ago, something like that, and I couldn't put it down. I really enjoy games like this. I think space exploration games, especially with the vibes and the structure of No Man's Sky, really are up my alley. Now, to start off the review, or my thoughts essentially, as I've said before, there are definitely pros and cons to the expedition. There's like no way around it. And again, I have nothing against the developers. I think Hello Games is pretty good as a company. I have nothing against the game. I play it all the time actually. And I definitely don't have anything against Sean Murray because, you know, again, I don't have anything against the developers of the game, even though he probably would not really want to meet me, you know, since him being an introvert and all. It's pretty good that the expedition is over right now, because when I was first kind of having this video in the works in my brain and I was writing down a script, this was probably a month and a half ago, back when the expedition was still going, so I can now actually give a full-on review of the expedition. Now I'm going to start off the review of the expedition with the pros section, because I feel like it's always best to go off on the pros first, so that way you don't come across like some negative Nancy that does not enjoy anything in life. And nothing could be further from the truth in my case. I love a lot of stuff, I enjoy a lot of types of things, but I do think that pros are also very important to have known first. So let's start off with the new enemy type. The swarm has, hive and drones. Drones aren't like the usual enemy types in space. There are multiple entities in one unit, which are pretty nice because it really can diversify the way that the space combat works, or how you go around and trying to shoot down one ship essentially to take it out. I found that whenever I was fighting the drones or the hive in space or whatever, it was interesting because it took a little bit longer, not because my damage wasn't good, but because the way that the enemy ships were literally multiple entities within the same unit. So it really did play into you having to maneuver better or shoot better. Now, does this mean that it was the most mind-blowing, greatest combat innovation for this game? No. By no means is this that thing. But I will say it was a nice refresher on just the add enemy type, point ship at enemy ship, hold down, trigger, rinse, repeat kind of thing. And the hive acts like its namesake. The drones come from the hive like bees from a nest. So it was really nice that they actually played into what they were going for. The swarm was definitely going for a swarm vibe, so it makes sense. And now I'm going to be talking about the soft PvP system, and by soft PvP I mean it was not necessarily a one-on-one or team versus team combat, shoot 'em up kind of thing. It was essentially player faction versus player faction type deal. So you have 3 new factions for players. You got the Royals, the Weavers, and the Sages. At the start, you take the test for faction placement, or roughly around the start. I can't remember exactly when, but it was roughly near the beginning where you have to take essentially a test to get your placement for which one of these 3 factions you get placed into. Factions, though the primary goal is pretty much the same, is to defeat the swarm, which, go figure, they also want to be first place. That's where the PvP aspect comes in, right? So it was nice that they actually implemented a sort of PvP system, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit later in this video on what I would have done differently to make it more interesting or more in depth, but it was definitely in the right direction in terms of players who would want a PvP-like experience, because it was also not necessarily too harsh to deal with for casual players or normal players or whatever, but it was nice to know that it was kind of like a friendly competition competition type of deal, and that was kind of refreshing. All right, now let's talk about the space combat. So aiming while locked on feels better. Now, I don't know if this is placebo. I don't know if it's because I haven't played too long before the Expedition came out, but I did play a little bit, and when the Expedition did come out, it did feel better to me. I don't know if it's because they changed the way maneuverability works. I don't know if it's because somehow I perfectly timed it where my ship had a good upgrade that aligned with the Expedition coming out. I don't know. I really do not know if that's the case. I've looked into it. I think that they did change certain things that revolve around space combat and space and maneuverability, so maybe that's exactly what I was feeling. So tethered aiming feels more free. I use tethered aiming. I just like the way that it feels. I like the way that it looks. It makes it seem more of a space combat kind of simulation for me, but it's not too much pressure to try and get the most pinpoint accuracy, but you still have to be able to maneuver. I've always liked the way that tethered aiming works in this game versus the fixed camera. But it feeling better, by that I mean whenever I was in combat and then I was locking onto one of the hive members or the drones or whatever, I noticed that it did feel better to just aim and move my mouse around to like follow the target and lead the target versus how it was before. Again, could this be the update? Is it just placebo? It might be a little bit of both, but from what I read into, I do think it does have to do something with the update, something with the Expedition itself, and the updates implemented with the Expedition. So there's that. All right, now we're going to be moving on to the cons section of the video and things that I kind of think need work. So like I said before, I'm going to touch up on the soft PvP system right now. There were some balancing issues that I kind of found when I was going through my own experience, not because it had anything to do with skill or lack thereof, not because there was no patience or any willingness to do it. My first and biggest issue with it is that you could only do 3 of the missions per day, or per like what, 5 or 6 or how many hours it was, but essentially it was go do 3 missions and then rinse, repeat, that sort of thing. And I know that there are ways that I'm pinching myself now, kind of angry that I didn't really do it or think about it, but there are ways that you could have like selected multiple saves to kind of help your own faction complete their goals with more than just 3 missions per. But my thing about that is that I don't think players should have to think about a workaround for something that could have just been added in the game in general. I think that limiting each player within each faction to only 3 missions was kind of, it just kind of felt like a step backwards from where it could have gone. Because if you have players like myself or those who literally wanted to pour a lot of their free time into the Expedition, they could have allowed that. It would have felt more rewarding. It could have felt like I'm actually trying to fight towards something. And by pretty much, I think after the first few days after me going into phase 3, I was kind of bored of it because I was like, oh, log in, do my 3 missions, great, go back to my regular save or whatever, get out of my Expedition save and go do something else for a while. Now log off, come back on the next day, rinse, repeat, right? That was literally what happened to me, and I don't feel like I'm the only player who felt that. So I don't know, just let me know if maybe you disagree or maybe you liked that. I personally don't think that a soft PvP system like that really needed a limitation on the missions that the players could do per rotation. Now, if they're going to be implementing a system like that, I think what they needed to do was make it so they changed the way that the reward system works. Because as of right now, or as how it was, it makes the advancement very unbalanced and restrictive. The only way for you to essentially get ahead is either enemy factions have to literally slow down a lot or stop for you to advance, and that just is not going to be the case, and that wasn't the case in the game. I mean, I was kind of surprised when I logged back on. I found out that the Royals were in 3rd, but they were in 2nd for the longest time, so, you know, it can happen, but I don't feel like it should have been that way. It should have just allowed players to do as much missions as they want, and if not, then they should have changed the way the reward system worked. Another part of this soft PvP system that needs to be reworked or looked into, I think, is sabotage missions don't really seem worth it to me. And let me explain. They only take away 1 per person from the score. all the math together, if you do all 3 mission types, is you get +3 from purge missions to your own faction, you get -1 to enemy factions, and then you get +2 to all factions. Let me go further. Okay, if 1,000 people do every mission type per faction, each faction would receive 7,000 in total. I'll show you here. In my nifty little awesome graphical table that I created, we have the royals here, the weavers, and the sages. We have the mission type, purge, sabotage, restore, and the totals. The totals, I already have a formula put in, so every one of the boxes above it will add into it. So for instance, if I put 1 here, and 1 here, it will equal 3. See? And then if I put like 2, 1, 2, it will equal 5. If I put 2 + 2 + 2, it will equal 6. So you guys get the gist. If 1,000 people per faction were to do this, let's say you got 1,000 people for the royals +3 to own factions. So that would be 3,000 because again, it's 1,000 times 3. So you got 3,000 there. Then the weavers, they would get 3,000. And the sages would get 3,000, right? Okay, nothing wrong with that. Now, sabotage would be -1 to enemy factions. Now, -1 times 1,000 would be -1,000. So, if the royals were going to do that, so the weavers would be down 1,000, and the sages would be down 1,000. But the weavers, of course, are playing ball as well. They're going to hit the royals with 1,000. And the sages with 1,000. So the sages are now at 2,000, -2,000, right? And the sages, of course, are not going to skip out on that. They're going to be in the play too. So we're going to have 2,000 here for royals. And then we're going to have for the weavers 2,000. So that means the royals affected the weavers and the sages. The weavers affected the royals and the sages. And the sages affected the royals and the weavers, okay? So right now, look at our totals. We got 1,000, 1,000, and 1,000 across the board. Okay, let's do that 1,000 again for restore, +2 to all factions. So royals would get their 2,000, 2,000 for the weavers, and 2,000 for the sages. Isn't that nice? Now, the weavers participated, obviously. So add another 2,000 onto that. You get 4,000, 4,000, and 4,000. And of course, the sages are still part of it, so add another 2,000 onto that. You have 6,000, 6,000, and 6,000. Okay, that means if 1,000 people from royals, 1,000 people from weavers, and 1,000 people from sages did every single mission type, you would have 7,000 across the board for the score. Meaning you would be at a stalemate. You would be there would be no way to advance because you're all equal, right? You would literally have to wait for some of the other factions to stop or slow down or for whatever reason. But honestly, every time I hopped on, it didn't happen. I was always kind of pretty much just stuck where I was the last time I was logged on, okay? Now, let's say people didn't do the sabotages. That was 9,000. That's a boost to 2,000 per faction. And here's the thing. Personally, I feel like if everybody in the community just didn't do the sabotages, we would have got through that phase way quicker than it needed to be. It did not need to take as long as it did. So now let's look at it the singular way. Okay, let's say myself, I was part of the royals. So if I was to do the purge mission, I would get 3, and weavers would get nothing, sages would get nothing. Okay, sabotage, -1 to enemy factions, get -1 there, -1 there. Okay, restore, +2 to all factions. So we got a +2 there, or sorry, I could do that, 2 and 2. So it looks good this way, singularly, right? It looks good like, oh, if I did it by myself, oh, it's great. But remember, you have to take into account that the weavers are also going to do that, and the sages are also going to do that. So let's say a weaver player does the same thing. 3 for their faction, -1 for the enemies, so royals get 1 and the sages get 1, so now they're at a -2, and they get +2 across the board, so that adds 2 onto the 2, so we get 4, 4, and 4. Now sages, there you go, 3, -1 to enemy factions, so -2 and -2, okay. And then, of course, they're playing ball, restored, so we have +2 to all factions. Let's add it, so we have 6 there, 6 there, and 6 there. So we got 7 across the board. Now you see how that singular by yourself doesn't look as good now? Because if you're just going to apply it with one person per each, it's Now you're all tied, okay? And that's what I'm talking about. I think that the soft PvP system was way, I don't know, too rushed, and it felt like Sabotage kind of drain. It feels like it shouldn't, but it does. Sabotage, based on the numbers, drags it on way too longer. Because, like, watch, I'll delete these right now. We're going to jump up to 9. There you go. That's already 2 whole points per person to get closer to the goal. And at the end of the day, honestly, I stopped really caring about being in first place, and I just wanted to get to the end of the expedition. Because at first I was like, oh, cool, let's get into the competitive aspect of it. And then once I realized this system and I did the math and I just thought about it for a while, it really wasn't my cup of tea. And it feels, like I said before, very unbalanced and very restrictive for what it was trying to do. This next part, I'm going to be talking about the forced colors. Now, this part isn't really like a major, oh, this was a table flipper or a rage-inducing con for me, but it was one that I found very strange. And I'm talking about the forced skin colors because it didn't really feel necessary to me. The clothes and gear makes sense, you know, so like if you're a royal, you having red gear made sense, or if you were a weaver having blue gear and a sage having green gear, that made sense to me. I don't really understand why the skin was a forced color. Now, mind you, I feel like if you just had the skin when you load it in, and then if you could go to the appearance modification station and change your skin color back to what you usually wear, I think that would have been a really cool inclusion, especially considering you still would be part of the faction, right? And it would be player choice. And personally, for me, I'm not one of those people who's like gung-ho, paint every part of your body for your team's colors kind of deal. That's just not me. I thought it would have been really cool if I was walking around with my Royals gear on, so it was red and all that. But if I was wearing my regular character's skin pattern and colors, that would have been really interesting. And like I said, inclusivity versus exclusivity. So it would have been more of an inclusive feature, not forced on you. So if players wanted to change their skin back to how they normally would, they could. If they wanted to keep the faction color, they could. It's a win-win for both, and I don't really see why that was kind of forced, especially also considering if you go to the No Man's Sky website, they actually have a clip on the actual expedition section, and if you look at that, everybody in that clip looks like they are just wearing normal gear or colored gear, but they're not all blue and all green and all red, you know. All right, now let's switch on to the forced colors, or another segment of it with the ships. So the forced ship color and type can be bypassed if you buy one from an NPC, and it doesn't force color after purchase. And that was really cool. Good on them for allowing us to actually buy a ship. One thing that kind of did weird me out, and it's not major, again, but I really didn't think it was necessary to force us to not be able to build our own Corvettes, especially considering you essentially are able to buy any other ship in any station that is not forced on a color. The only reason why I could think of why they didn't allow it in the expedition is because the way to get Corvette parts is that you have to go around some planets and for salvageable technology, but I think wasn't that replaced with something within the expedition for one of the mission types? If I'm mistaken, that's fine, and if I am, then that does beg the question, why was that forced on us? Why couldn't we go out and build our own Corvettes? I don't know, just kind of seems like one of those things that it would have been really cool to do, to be able to like go from the ground up on an expedition save and create a new Corvette to take on the Swarm. Honestly, that's pretty much all I've got on cons or things that I think really held back the experience for me. So this part is going to be kind of my final thoughts on the expedition as a whole and what I really think about Expedition 22. So it's obvious that they were trying to do something pretty big to try and add a new flavor to the game, more so than what they've already done in the past year. Seriously, it's pretty crazy the amount of growth content they've released literally in an entire year. So hats off to them for that. I like the fact that they're trying to branch out into different enemy types, or how space combat can work or be altered just for a challenge sake. So there's that for you. I also like that they did tackle into the PvP aspect of things, even though it was more casual and on the softer side. I still like the fact that they were trying to test the waters to see what they could really do. But as I already covered in the video, I did have some issues with how the PvP system worked. Now, it didn't really ruin the experience for me overall, but I definitely do feel like that point system and time restriction both together did not help me at all. It actually made the experience a little worse because, like I said, there were days when I would literally just log on, do my 3 missions, and then log off, and then rinse repeat, to the point where I just kind of got bored of doing that, so I just didn't do that for a while. So there was that aspect of the expedition to keep in mind. Do I really think that Hello Games dropped the ball on this expedition? No, not really. I feel like they're just trying to test waters to try and see where they can push the boundaries of what is capable in No Man's Sky. Because as of right now, we have things in the game that you literally could not have thought of years ago, like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, you know. And I think that's pretty commendable. The fact that a team of people so passionate about not only the content that they're making, but also about the consumer as well, their fans. It is very nice and refreshing that Hello Games still kind of holds up to that standard, where they're not charging you money for any of these expansions or add-ons. They're not charging you money for any of the extra content that's coming out. They're strictly just putting their nose to the grindstone, as it were, and grinding out content for this game. For better or for worse, that's up to you, but personally, I actually like games that have more inclusivity versus exclusivity, and No Man's Sky is one of those games that definitely hits the nail on the head when it comes to inclusivity. And by that I mean versatility within the gaming experience. For instance, if I want to go out and start gathering resources, I can. If I want to start using those resources to go craft a mega base, I can. If I want to go explore the stars, I can. If I want to go trade, I can. If I want to go learn new languages, I can. If I want to go exploring deep underwater, I can. And you get where I'm going from. I don't want to keep going on, but honestly, I could literally go for a lot longer on just the amount of cool stuff that this game does have to offer. And what does that have to do with the expedition? Well, like I said, I think the expedition, they're trying to test the boundaries and the waters to see what they can push out for a new enemy type, a new mission style, a new structure. And though I do think that that approach is still refreshing and it's nice that they're still going about the game in that way, I think that there were definitely cons that they could kind of work out and iron out, and there you go. Now, anyone who wants to get angry about this criticism, who are like die-hard No Man's Sky fans, listen, Hello Games wants stuff like this. They want people to tell them what they think about the game, both pros and cons, the positives and the negatives, because without criticism, people don't grow, they don't get better. Without the criticism, Hello Games would have never become what they are now. They would have never taken the step back. They wouldn't have known what to focus on. They wouldn't have known where to kind of regroup and reclaim their honor, and they wouldn't have climbed their way up to what they are now without criticism. So I think criticism is a valuable tool, especially in the gaming sphere, when you're trying to seriously look at a video game under a lens. And let's be real with ourselves, a video game is more than just pixels and sounds. It's literally an experience. How deep the experience goes is dependent on the game, or sometimes the player. And I think that that's valuable in itself. So with all that said, I want to end the video with a nice wave. I want to commend No Man's Sky and all the players, the community, for what they have done over the years. It is definitely a game I will always return to. I will always play over and over again, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think that it's a valuable game, and I think that Hello Games, if they rework and iron out certain details to make the game work better, will help them out in the long run. But that's going to do it for today's video. I really hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like, comment, subscribe, do you know all the YouTube stuff, and I will see you in the next video. And as always, stay wonderful.